Kakadosh Boker Or Masechet Bava Metzia Daf Amud Aleph 9A1. We're talking about right now the following. We were speaking about Tashema. We're going to start from the bottom of Chet Amud Bet. Tashema, we learned in the Braita. Shnaim shayu moshchin begamal umanigim bechamor. You have two people that they're pulling the gamal and they're directing the chamor. Or one person was pulling it and one person was manhig. So he said, "B'midah zot kanu." So they are going to acquire it. Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, "Leolam lo kana sheteh meshicha begamal v'anaga b'chamor." You're never going to acquire it unless there's going to be meshicha in the gamal, right? And the meshicha by the gamal and hanaga by the chamor, because that's the way to acquire, which means each animal acquires it in a different way. Ktani miyat, however, though we did learn, right? O she'aya echad moshech ve'echad manhig, moshech u'manhig in rachuv lo. So from here, we would want to say is that it's only in such a case, right, of whether it's going to be meshicha or manhig, but not rochev. Rochev for sure you're not going to acquire. So answers the Gemara, hu adin dafilu rachuv. No, really be'emet, even if you're writing it. V'hadektani moshech u'manhig. So that which we learned, moshech u'manhig is lapuke min Rabbi Yehuda, to exclude Rabbi Yehuda. Te'amar, but he says, ad sheteh meshicha begamal v'anaga b'chamor. Kamashmalan comes teach you tafilu ipchanami kani, that even the opposite you're also going to acquire it. Okay, fine. Says the Gemara, if so, liarvinu v'litninu. So just mix it up and put them together. Shnaim shayu moshchin umanigin ben begamal chamor. Two people that they were either moshchin or manigin, whether it's the gamal or the chamor, they're going to acquire it. So why do we have to split chamor and gamal? Why do we split it? So answers the Gemara, Ika chad sad de lo kani. No, the reason why you have to actually split it is because there is going to be one way that you do not acquire it. Ika de amri, some people say meshicha b'chamor, right? That means basically that you're not going to acquire if you're going to do meshicha by the chamor, right? Which is the pulling by the chamor. Ika de amri, and some people say anaga begamal, which is basically the directing by the gamal. So you see from here that basically that there does exist, since there's one sad which does not acquire, so therefore we have to split it up, because it's not always right? It's not the same thing. So says the Gemara, ve'it the motiv miseifa. Some people, they actually come and they want to bring this from the seifa, where it says b'midah zo kana, b'midah zo l'miutimai. When it says with this, they're going to acquire. What is it coming to exclude? So he says, Lav lemiyute rachuva. We're not talking about that it's going to exclude that if they're riding on the animal. So answers the Gemara, no. Lemiyute ipcha, to do the other way around. Which means if you did meshicha by the chamor or hanaga by the gamal. Because if you remember, what was the Braita? The Braita was, Tashema, shnaim shayu moshchim megamal umanigim mechamor, o shaya echad moshech ve'echad manhig, b'midah zot kanu. Right? And then it says, Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, no, you're not going to acquire until there's going to be meshicha b'gamal and hanaga b'chamor. Okay? So he comes and he says, one second, if you're going to tell me this, so then it comes out that Rabbi Yehuda is the same as Tanakama. One more time, let's read the Braita. The Braita says, Shnaim shayu moshchim begamal umanigin b'chamor. Two people that they were being moshech the gamal, or they were being manhig in the chamor. Yeah? And then you come and says, or one by one, meaning one was moshech and one was manhig. Now, we didn't explain which one's for which. And then we said, you acquire. Comes Rabbi Yehuda, and he said, no, depends which one. There is going to be by the chamor, there's going to be a gamal. One of them is meshicha, and one of them is hanaga. So therefore, if you're not going to tell me that that was a pshat and b'midah zot, so therefore it's the same shita, Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama then. That's what he says. Yihachi ainu Rabbi Yehuda. So answers the Gemara, Ika benayu, the difference between them is going to be tzad echad de lo kana. The difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda is going to be only one case where you're not going to acquire according to Rabbi Yehuda, but according to Tanakama, you are going to acquire. Id de amri, and some people say it's meshicha b'chamor, and some people say it's hanaga b'gamal. Meaning it's only one side, it's not both. Right? Meaning according to Rabbi Yehuda, this was the only way to do the kinyan. Meaning you needed to do meshicha and the gamal and hanaga b'chamor, which means both ways, opposite way, which means hanaga b'gamal or meshicha by the chamor doesn't help, but that goes on both ways. According to Tanakama, it's only one of them that doesn't help the other way, and we're not sure which. Well, we're not saying we don't know which one. So says now the Gemara, Tashema. So now the Gemara is going to bring another Braita, and the Braita is going to say like this: Echad rachuv lachamor, ve'echad tafus b'mosera. If you remember, we said that the riding, we kept on saying riding is not good. And we kept on saying the mosera was not good. So therefore, we keep on saying about the meshicha and the hanaga, which that's the best. So now the question is, what happens if one's riding on the chamor? Yeah, so one's rachuv, right? Again, this is a chamor of efker. Ve'echad tafus b'mosera, and somebody else is grabbing on to the reins, right? The harness, I think we translated yesterday, yeah? Which means he's not manhigoto. But if he's manhigoto, we said for sure that the one's manhig is going to acquire. So he's not manhig, but he's just holding on to the moserot. Yeah? Yes, obviously. I don't understand. So he comes and he says, right? Ze kana chamor, veze kana mosera. Very interesting. He says the rochev, he acquires the chamor. And the guy that was holding on to the mesera acquires the mosera. Yeah? Shemamina, though we learn from here, rachuv kani, that if you are riding, you do acquire it. So this is the proof that riding on an animal acquires the animal. So says the Gemara, hachanami, here too, what were we speaking about? You remember this case? Bemanhig beraglav. You were kicking, they were kicking with their legs. So that's called manhig. He was manhig beraglav. So in a case where manhig beraglav, you're also going to acquire it, even though you're only going to be rochev. So ask the Gemara, ihachiv so, nikni nami rachu b'mosera. If you already acquire the hamor, so you get the entire package. Mosera as well. So answers the Gemara, Eima, you're right. Ze kana chamor v'chatzi mosera, v'ze kana chatzi mosera. You're right. The guy comes and he acquires the chamor and half of the mosera, and the other one half of the mosera. So says the Gemara, one second. Bishlema rachuv kani, tigmag kamag bale ben dat. He says like this. He says, I understand that you're going to tell me now that the one that's riding acquires it, because at the end of the day, he's going to acquire also a chelik in the mosera, because at the end of the day, right, the manhig is grabbing the other side of the mosera, and he's picking it up. But tafus b'mosera b'maykane, but the one that's actually grabbing onto the mosera, how does he acquire exactly? He didn't do agba'ah. So what do you do exactly? If there's something efker, let's say this Gemara, right, don't get any ideas. It's not efker. Let's say this Gemara is efker. Yeah? Which means somebody could come and take this Gemara. Yeah? And I come and I do this. Did I do anything? No. You have to raise it. You have to do agba'ah. Right? So what we do is, right? Thank you. Right? So he comes and he says this. So he says, if right now you didn't do any agba'ah, so what does it help then? Like, what's going on? Doesn't make sense. Yeah? So the same thing here. You have one guy holding on to the mosera, to the harness. How does he do kinyan agba'ah? I understand that the guy that's riding, we just said that the rider acquires the animal. And agav that he's acquiring the animal, right? He says he's being magbel bendat, which means since the manhig is grabbing on the other side, he's like picking it up towards him when he's actually using, right? Because basically, when you're sitting down on the thing and you're holding the reins, I think they call the reins to the harness, no? The bridles?
Yeah, it makes sense. You hold the
Fine.
bridle like this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, he says, right, you're holding the reins, right? So he comes and he says towards yourself, it makes sense. But he says, but the other guy that's just holding onto the thing, what kinyan is he doing? What's he doing? So answers the Gemara, you're right. Ema, you have to say, ze kana chamor v'kule mosera, v'ze kana mashetuvus biyado. He says, you're right. The guy that's riding, he acquires a hamor, but not only a hamor, the entire mosera. The other guy, what he acquires is whatever's in his hand. So imagine he's got, let's say, like the long rope or whatever it is that you have it, right? So you've got the long rope, and he's only grabbing on over here. That's what he has. He only has that little tiny piece. Everything else, he doesn't get. Nothing. So says the Gemara, Hai mai. What svara is that then? אם תמצור מהמגביה מציע לחברו, קנה חברו, הנמילה איך דגמגבלה עדייתא דחברה, היי עדייתא דדקה מגבלה. Says he's doing it for himself. ואי הוא לא קני, right? So if right now he himself is not going to acquire לחרין מקנה, he does it for other people, which means this guy wanted to do the kavanah of a kinyan for other people, right? So how could that happen if he himself is not going to acquire anything? So if so, how could it be that the rochev is acquiring chetzi mosera? So Ravashi comes and he says, no, you're right. Ze kana chamor ubet page, right? This one acquires the chamor and the ritzuot which are attached to his head, right? Which basically they come and that's like the chamor itself. The ze kana mashtafus biyado, and the other one takes that which is in his hands. The ashan and the rest of the mosera lo kana lo ze velo ze, nobody gets, because nobody actually did a real kinyan on it.
Goes back to Hefker.
Yeah, it's still hefker. No, it goes back. It never became not hefker, so it's still hefker. Okay, so says the Gemara, right? 1 second. Rabbi Avu comes and he says, "Leolam kedetani." Really, be'emet, it was like the girsa that we said from the beginning, that the one that's tofes b'maserah, he does acquire it, even though he didn't do hagbah. Why? Hoil v'yachol lenatka v'lavi etzlo. The fact that he could bring it to him. Right? What does that mean? Since the head of the chamor is gavoa, it's very simple. It's much higher up. So therefore, it's very simple for him just to pull it to himself. Right? Even the chilek of the motzara, which is actually on the head. So therefore, without even actually to do akba. So because of that, he's going to be tofes, even the chilek, which is, on the head of the chamor, right? Because it's not lacking hagbah.
Instead of doing Rabbi, he goes to the...
No, but the fact that it's like because it's basically he's pulling it to himself, and the pulling it to himself is already going to be, right, already enough. So says the Gemara, how does that work? That's a joke. Oh, what's this? He says it's a outside shita, right? De'achitzonit. He says why? Dilo temahachi. If you're not going to say this, talit she'imunachat chetzial gabe karka v'chetzial gabe amud. Imagine right now you have a talit, which is half on top of karka and half on top of an amud. Amud is like a pillar. A pillar.
Post.
Yeah. So what does that mean? So for example, just if you want, right, this could happen many, many times. Right? Sometimes you're walking and you have right beside you, let's say the wall. So pretend instead of wall, it's a post or a pillar, right, that you have right there. Now the ground right above there is equal to the wall. Meaning down here it's not. This happens in Israel all the time. Right? You're walking up the street, right? You're walking, all of a sudden here there's a little wall, but the ground is right here is higher up. Right? It's not like so now what happens is you have this talit, which is on the pole, right? Is on this pillar and on the ground. It's on both. Okay? So he says over here, you have chetzi on the karka, the chetzi al gabe amud. Yeah? So now what happens? So basically what happens is, it's very easy to bring it to yourself, right? Because if I'm on the lower part, all I have to do is do like this, and that's it. So he says, you're going to come, one person is going to come and pick it up from the karka, one person is going to pick up the other half from the amud. You're going to tell me the kama kani ubatri lokani, you're going to tell me the first one acquires it and the second one no? Because the agba of the rishon is considered agba in the entire thing, because he could pull it to himself. Right? Ulavi etzlo. That's what you're going to tell me now? And the other agba is nothing? That is, even though they both pick it up, because it's easier for me to pull, so now that's it? It's mine? What's going on? But rather he says, Ella, you're right. Elahad Rabbi Avu is barutahi. It's an external shita that we're not going like. So Tashama, we're going to try to bring another proof from Braita now. Rabbi Eliezer says, Rachuv basadeh umanhig ba'id kana. If you're going to be riding the animal, right, in the field in order to come and to acquire it, or you're manhig the animal in the city to acquire it, you're going to acquire, right, the animal. So from here, mifurash again, you see that rachuv, that riding it, you acquire. Right? Beforehand, we kept on coming and saying about that, the rider does acquire, but the other one doesn't, and then the other one does, because it all depends, can he pull it by him? And then we said, no, but it's a shita chitzonit, right? We don't hold of it. But now we come back to the concept of the rider. And again, according to the Spraita, Rabbi Eliezer comes and he says that the rider, right, you do actually come and you acquire. So says the Gemara, Chanam, you're right, manhi biraglav. We keep on saying the same thing. What is the same thing that we keep on saying? We keep on saying that if somebody's going to be manhig biraglav, how are you manhig biraglav? By kicking the animal with your feet. You're being manhig, you're directing the animal. And this leading of the animal, right, is going to be okay. And that's why you acquire it. Hachanami manhig biraglav. So says the Gemara, if so, hainu manhig. It's the same thing. What's the difference between manhig b'raglav and manhig? Answers the Gemara the same answer that we answered before. Today gavne manhig. You're right. There are two different ways of manhig. One of them is manhig the normal way, and then one of them is manhig b'raglav, and you're acquiring with both. But you always need to do manhig, meaning that rochev in itself, according to the shita, you do not acquire. So ask the Gemara, Yihachiv, so what? No, that's what we're saying. It's not manhig. No. He says, one second. He says, Yihachiv, so rachuv ba'ir maitamalo. He says, one second. Why is it then that rachuv ba'ir is not going to come and acquire it if at the end of the day he's manhig b'raglav? If he's manhig b'raglav, yeah, so therefore, why in the world is he acquiring it now? So Amar Rav Kahana comes and says, it's not normal to ride in the city because of tzniut. So therefore, since you're not doing it the normal way, you don't acquire. Huh? Here it says, here it's mashma even for a man. Doesn't say. Which means we're talking about that it's not normal to ride in the city because of tzniut reasons, and therefore you're not going to ride in the city. You're only going to ride in the field. So says the Gemara, Elmaleh Ravashi Rav Kahana, says Ravashi to Rav Kahana, Ela me'ata. So now I'm going to ask you the following question. Imagine you pick up a wallet on Shabbat. It's not normal. So what? You're not going to acquire it? Yeah, but because of that, you're not going to acquire it. Right? So he comes and he says, Ela beraber, my davad, avad vekani. Whatever you did, and you acquire it. Hachanam is so to hear. My davad, avad vekani. At the end of the day, if right now you're going to come and you're going to do something, even if it's not the norm, but you did it, you should still acquire it. So therefore the same thing. It's not normal to come and to ride in the city. So if it's not, but still you did ride in the city, so fine, you didn't do something tzarua. But then you should still acquire it. Answers the Gemara, Ela b'mekach u'memkar askinan. No, really, we're talking about mekach u'memkar. The Elmaleh that he tells him, Keneh kederech shebnei adam konim. What does that mean? You have to acquire it the way the normal people acquire it, which is through a kinyan that normal people do it. So therefore, if you're going to acquire it in any other way, even though it was fitting to do a kinyan, you don't acquire. Because that's mekach u'memkar. Right? And therefore, mekach u'memkar is not the same like from hefker. In achenam, you're right to do with hefker. Maybe you're right, 100%. Yeah? But if it's going to be talking about, right, the mekach u'memkar, and I'm telling you that this is the way that you're going to acquire it, so it doesn't work. If you're not going to do it the normal way, it's not going to acquire. Teta mubet, right, 9b. V'yireshut rabimu. Now the Gemara is going to explain and says like this. If it's going to be in Reshut Rabim, you are going to acquire it, right? Why? Because it is normal for there to come and to what's it called, and to ride the animal, okay, over there, and not to be manhig, right? In order that they shouldn't, separate between him and the animal. So v'yadam chashuv, and if the rochev is somebody that's going to be somebody chashuv, so he's going to acquire it even in a simta, meaning which is not why, because normally they don't actually even go without riding on their animals. So even a simta where there's not a lot of people, they also ride, because that's like a derech kavod. So therefore, since it's a derech kavod, so therefore they will also acquire it in such a fashion. Vishahi, if it's a woman, Kanya, she also acquires it. Why? She doesn't go right with her legs, right? Does it go? Why? Because she doesn't have koach, right? She's going to come hold it in order to make sure it doesn't run away. No. Inish zilahu. But if he's a person which is mezulzal, which means a guy that he's not sanua, right? And therefore he does it in front of everybody. Not because he's important. Some people, again, remember, there's a difference between somebody that's important or somebody that's mezulzal, but he doesn't care, so therefore he's going to do it anyway, right? He's also going to acquire it, right? Now, so that means when the Braita says that in the Rochev you're not going to acquire it in the city, we're talking about a Benoni, a regular person. Why? He's not chashuv, right? Because he's rich, right? He's not rich, right? He's not... So that's an Adam Benoni. So here, right, if he's not going to be mitbayesh to go with his animal, right, and therefore it's not normal, right, to go in the simta because of tzniut. Okay? Now, here, right, he comes and he says like this. He comes and he says... Bae Rabbi Elazar. Ask Rabbi Elazar. Okay? Somebody tells his friend, Meshoch bemazo, liknot kelim shalea. Imagine a person comes and he says, right, do meshicha, right, which means you're going to pull the animal in order to acquire the kelim which is on top of it. Okay? Mahu, what's halacha? Do we say liknot, right? When we come and we're speaking about the entire concept of liknot, mi amale kene, which means when a person comes and he's saying, right, do meshicha, and by doing the meshicha, you're going to acquire the utensils. But the animal itself, no. So the question is, do we say that we're talking about like meshoch liknot, which means, doesn't mean that you have to say, right, kene, which that was the lashon that we just mentioned before. That means you're mitkaven liknot, right? But I'm not going to acquire it to you, so therefore he's not going to acquire it, right? So he says, ela berather meshoch be'emazo ukni kilim she'alea mahu. You have to say meshoch be'emazo, right? Ukne, not liknot, ukne, right? Kilim she'alea. What's halacha? Now here, for sure, it's explaining that the kavanah is that the mocher wants lehaknot. Right? He wants to acquire it to him. You know that already. Huh? Yes, only the kilim. So says the Gemara, mi mehanya meshicha de be'ema le'knui kelim or lo. We know the meshicha helps for the animal. But does the meshicha help for the kelim on the animal? That's the question.
That's the question. Is
Yeah.
there a risk that he acquires the horse also?
For sure not. If I don't have the kavanah to be makneh lechad the horse, you could do whatever you want to the horse, you'll never be koneh the horse. The question is the kelim on it, because I did have kavanah for the kelim on it. So now the question is, do we say that it's different from the fact that keilu, that I'm not, the yikar b'shicha is in the animal, not in the kelim? Okay? So says the Gemara, Amar Rava says, Elmaleh, if he told him keneh behema or keneh kelim, mi kana kelim, he says, one second. If he tells him in a case, acquire the animal and acquire the kelim, are you going to tell me that he's going to acquire midin chatzer? Chatzer me'alecheti. And therefore, if it's a chatzer me'alechet, lo kana, which means like this. We have a general rule that your chatzer is koneh. What's your chatzer? Your property. Right? However, though,
You mean in
right?
private domain?
Your property. That's your property.
Yes. No, I'm stressing because here it's not private. It will be not private domain. Is that the point?
No, nothing to do with it. One more time. Yeah, your property. When you have your property always acquires, right, your, whatever it is that you want to do. Right? I put something in my car. I put something, in my property. Doesn't matter what, it acquires it. Okay. What happens now if you're putting it in a chatzer me'alechet? Which means, for example, the donkey. The donkey is a chatzer, but it's not really a real chatzer, but it goes. It's not my land or something. It travels. So therefore, we have a general rule, the chatzer me'alechet does not acquire. Right? Anything of metaltalin, yes. Right? He comes and he says, they actually learn from the pasuk. Right? When it says, "Imimatzeh timatzeh biyado geneva," himatzeh timatzeh is lerabot lo rak et yado ela gam reshuto shel adam. So that's a gag, chatzer, kafif, all these other things. What?
You can do sukkah and
Nothing to do with it. You're allowed to do a sukkah me'alechet. We're talking about kinyanim. Are you allowed to come?
to live in,
You're right, and you could live in a car. You could live in those, how do you call those RVs? I don't know what they're called. You could live in those things. Yeah, there's no problem. Yeah? There's no connection between sukkah and making a kinyan. Making a kinyan, and again, we're not talking about regular kinyan, but you could do a kinyan with agba'ah, with meshicha. We're talking about kinyan chatzer. Remember, only kinyan chatzer. Kinyan chatzer is, for example, I come and I tell you, you know what, I want to buy this. You come and you put it on my table. So let's pretend that my table is 100% shayach to me, and it's my table. So that's called my chatzer. The second you put it on my table, I acquire it, because this is mine. Okay? Now, the difference, though, is going to be if it's chatzer me'alechet. Chatzer me'alechet means that it's traveling. So he says, so it's a chatzer me'alechet. It's not going to be koneh. So says the Gemara, v'chite imana, if you're going to tell me now, right, keshamda, it stopped. Meaning you're right. If the animal is walking, so nachenami. But here the animal stopped. And therefore, if it stopped, that's when, right, it's going to acquire it. Veha kol davar shilu me'alech lo kana, omed v'yoshev lo kana. The general rule is anything if it's walking, it's not going to, so even if it stopped, it's not going to be koneh. So for here, midin chatzer, you will never acquire it. So therefore, in this animal, remember one more time, what's the case? Right? I'm trying to sell you my utensils. It's on my animal. Right? I tell you, keneh, right? Acquire the utensils, and you're going to do a kinyam meshicha on my animal. You're not acquiring the animal. You're acquiring the utensils. The question is, do you acquire it or not? So the Gemara says, one second, if you were going to actually acquire both, would you acquire the utensils? Right? Why? Because there's no chatzer. Chatzer, it's a chatzer me'alechet. Even if it stopped, but it doesn't matter. It's still the same thing. It's chatzer. One more time. I'm coming and telling you, I want you to acquire my animal and my kelim. I give you the animal, you do meshicha. When you do meshicha, you did meshicha to the animal? Yes. Did you do meshicha to the kelim? Not really. Right? They're agav, they're getting pulled, but it's not. You're not doing kinyam meshicha on the kelim. So says the Gemara, one second. If right now I would have been koneh, tamidin chatzer. Why? I just was acquiring the animal. When I pulled the animal, I just acquired the animal. So now the utensils are on my animal. So I should acquire the utensils. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Because it's a chatzer me'alechet. Says the Gemara, okay, fine. So maybe he stopped. Says no, but the general rule is, even if it does stop, if it's a chatzer me'alechet, even if it stops, you're still not going to acquire. So therefore, what's the hilcheta? So what's halacha? In order for you to acquire, it has to be kfuta. Has to be tied. And therefore, since it cannot go, that means even though it's an animal which is usually a movable object, here since it's tied, it cannot move. And therefore, I do acquire. Right? Why? Because now this is my chatzer. But it has to be in such a case that I cannot, it does not move. Not that it's not moving now because it stopped. Right? But rather because it's tied up. Okay? So says the Gemara, so Amru le Rav Papa, right? Rav Huna ben Yeshua le Rava. Ela me'ata, we're going to ask the following question now. Haya me'alech misfina Imagine right now I have a boat. I've got one of these small boats, and I'm fishing. And all of a sudden I have such a mazal. The fish, pashut, I don't even have to fish. They come and they jump in my boat. Yeah? Sounds good, no? Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah, they come in. So it jumps inside. Okay. So what happens is are you going to tell me it's chatzer me'alechet and you're not going to acquire it? Answers the Gemara, Elmaleh, he says, Sefina minach naicha, umayahu dekamamtila. He says, no. The sfina, it's always resting. The water moves the sfina. So really, be'emed, the sfina is not the one that's moving. It's the water that's moving, right? The sfina. So he comes and he says, yeah.
So the water is acquiring.
Which one?
So the water is acquiring.
No, it's moving.
It's moving, so it is acquiring.
Well, no, because it's considered a chatzer lo me'alechet. If it's a chatzer lo me'alechet, so therefore the boat could acquire. So says the Gemara, Ravina Ravashi, says Ravina to Ravashi, right? He comes and he says, right, as follows. So he comes and he says, right, Amale Ravina Ravashi, Ela me'ata, hayta me'alechet b'rishut rabim v'zarku la get l'toch Hechal l'toch kalata, hachanami de lo megasha. Imagine right now, you're going to tell me that she's going in the Rishut Rabim. And he throws it in her bosom, or in her basket. Yeah? Right? Right, the chek. Hachanami de lo megarsha? Are you going to tell me now that she's not going to be divorced? He says, 1 second. Why? Because the sal, the basket, is considered a chatzer me'alechet. Now we know that it's a Mishnah mefureshet in Gitin, that if he threw the get inside of her bosom or inside of her basket, she is megureshet. Right? So what's the case? Right? Here, right, we're talking about now, the basket is like nowadays a purse. That's what we do nowadays. Right? That's called the, right, that's why nowadays they put it in the purse. Yeah? So he comes and he says, Elmaleh, he comes and he says, Kalta meinach naicha ve'ihi dekamesagya mituta. He comes and he says, the sal is actually be'emet nach. She's the one that's moving the sal. And therefore it's not considered a chatzer me'alechet, and therefore she is going to be mitgareshet, right? That's why she's mitgareshet, right? Because of it. So again, this is all the same concept, which means that's what he says over here. Something which is holech bekoach atzmo, that's considered eno mishtamel ledat baalim, because it has its own mind and it's going on its own. But if it's going because we're the ones that's moving it, so therefore it doesn't work. Okay? What? 1 second. Mishnah says like this. Right? Imagine right now you're riding on an animal and you find the lost object. So you tell your friend, Tenali, give it to me. Untala ve'amar, and he comes and he takes it, and he says, Ani zachiti ba. I'm zoche in it. Zachaba. Yeah, he's zoche. He doesn't have to give it to the writer. But im mishnatna lo amar ani zachiti batchila, lo amar klum. But if he gives it to him, and then he says, right, I was zoche in it for myself, klum, shum davar. Why? Because the second that's it now, it belongs to the writer. Okay? So he comes now and he says like this, the Gemara. Tananatam, we learned over there in the Mishnah. Okay, there's a Mishnah in Peah. Mishaliket ta Peah. Somebody that comes and he collects the Peah. V'amar, and he says, Harezo lo ploni ani. This is for the ani, Mr. X. Rabbi Eliezer says, Zachal lo. He is going to be zochetem. Chachamim say no. Yitenena la ani nimsa rishon. The first ani that comes in, you have to give it to him. Okay, so there's going to be a difference between right machloket Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer. So says the Gemara, Amar Ula. Yeah, he comes and he says, Amar Ula. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Machloket, right, me'ashir le'ani. He comes and he says this, the machloket, right, that we're talking about between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim is between the ashir and the ani, which means the ashir is coming to be mizakeh to the ani. Right? Why? The Rabbi Eliezer Savar, was Rabbi Eliezer holds migudim by mafke nechse, since he could be mafkid his properties. And then he's going to be an ani, and it's fitting for him. So Hashanami chazale, so to it's right now, it's fitting for him. So migud that if he wanted to be zoche to himself, he could be zoche, so he could be zoche to his friend, the ani. So imagine, he's got one ani that he's very friendly with. So he wants to acquire it for him. So why doesn't he do that? But Rabbanan Savri, Chad Migu Amrinan. Today Migu Lo Amrinan. We only say one Migu. Right? Which means that if he was an Ani, Migu de Zachil Nash Zachil Chavre. That's one Migu. But two Migus, I don't say. What are the two Migus? Migu number one. No, but what's Migu number one?
If you can become an ani.
Exactly. So that's Migu number one. Migu number one is that he could come and be mafkir nechasav and then become an ani. So that's called Migu number one. And then number two, now that he's already an ani, Migu de zachil nafshe, zachil chavre. So Migu that he could, so that you only say one Migu. You don't say two Migus. That's a shita chachamim. Aval, however though, me'ani le'ani, what happens if he was already poor? And he comes into your field. And he's going to take the peah, and he wants to be zocheh for Mr. Ani, right? Whatever his name is. Yeah? So he says, Divra kol zachalo. Here there's only one Ani, one migu. The what? The migu zachlo zachle chavre. It does work. So says the Gemara, Amar le Rav Nachman leula, says Rav Nachman to Ula, velema mor me'ani la'ani machloket. Why did you come and you tell me, you made an assumption. You made an anacha. What's anacha? That the machloket is between the ashir and ani. Let's say you're the Bala Sadeh, you're an ashir, and for an ani. But there's no machloket. Me'ani la'ani l'divrei kol, it's okay. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe I'm going to say, me'ani la'ani is a machloket. And even if the chachamim come and they say, even if this person's an ani, he still cannot be zochet his friend. Why? You're doing one migu, right? Which is basically, but they hold, chachamim come and they say, migu echad eno maklen lo koach zakot avur chavero. He comes and he says like this. That means even though Rabbi Eliezer comes and he holds that one and he can do it, it's not because of migu. He argues on the entire things, right? That he cannot, that he's making it losing. Meaning, if you remember, we spoke about that. What happens if you're going to be zachi, but it's chavla achrine. Chavla achrine means that it's bad for other people. Right? So you remember we said that usually you cannot acquire something if it's going to be bad for someone else. Here, obviously, Rabbi Eliezer is arguing on that, and he says that you can be zoche, even though you're going to make somebody else lose. So it's not because of the migu. Meaning, there's two concepts. Right now, I'm going to come and I'm going to pick this up. So by me picking this up, I'm going to be zoche in it. I could do it for myself. Now, can I do it for my friend? So there's a concept that I could do it for my friend, but one second, how could you do it for your friend? If you're doing it for your friend, you're making him lose. So how could it be that I'm making one person who gain, right? And one person is going to lose. So says the Gemara, why are you coming and you're telling me that it's because of the entire concept of anashir anani, even anani anani? Now why? I'm going to tell you like this. Remember, we said that if you're going to acquire something for somebody else, you cannot be acquiring it if it's chavla acharine. Chavla acharine means it's going to be bad for somebody else. Obviously, here Rabbi Eliezer is arguing on that. And he says that you could. So you don't need the migu. The migu is that since I could acquire it for myself, I could acquire it for someone else, and therefore even if it is going to be, it doesn't matter because I could acquire it for myself. I don't need that migu, and therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you do acquire it, and according to Chachamim, you do not acquire it. But we're talking about from anani anani. So says the Gemara, Deha Metzia Hakol Ani Metzla. Everybody is considered anani to do with the Metzia. Utnan, and we learned in a Mishnah. היה רוכב על גבי בהמה וראה את המציאה ואמר לחברו תנה לי ונטלה ואמר אני זכיתי בה, זכה בה. He is זוכה בה. So therefore he's coming and he's saying that if a person right now is riding on an animal and he comes and he finds something, he tells his friend, listen, give this to me. So he picks it up and he gives it to him, right? Sorry, he picks it up and he says, אני זכיתי בה. זכה בה, he is זוכה. So if you're going to come and you're going to tell me, מעני לעני is מחלוקת. So he comes and he says, so matniti mani, who's our Mishnah then? Shitat Rabbanan. So then it makes sense, meaning our Mishnah goes according to the Rabbanan that one ani cannot be zoche to another ani, and therefore, just like he picks it up, he's not going to be mizakeh for the rider. So therefore, because it belongs to him. Elayama, but if you're going to tell me that the machloket is by an ashir and ani, so aval me'ani la'ani divrei kol, but ani according to everybody, you are going to be zoche. So who's our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is not like Rabbanan and not like Rabbi Eliezer. Right? Why? Because our Mishnah was saying he cannot be mizakeh for his friend, even though he could be mizakeh to himself. Now, why not? It's not Rabbanan, it's not Rabbi Eliezer. So he answers, you're right. Elmaleh, he comes and he says, right? He says like this, matnitin de amar tchila. He comes and he said it before he even picked it up. Meaning the guy, even before picking it up, he went and says, I'm going to acquire it for myself. Whoops, and picked it up. So now the rider loses out. Because the second that he did that from the beginning, that's why it doesn't help. That's also logical, because he says, if he already gave it to him, then he says, he didn't say anything. Why do we say tchila? He says, pshita. Even if he didn't say it. I love the Kamashmalam. He did say it in the beginning, and therefore the beginning, once the second he comes and he says, I'm picking it up for myself, it's going to be for himself and not for anybody else.